Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at PTB World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in reference to, of course, what has been happening in the country since May 9th and the violence that was spread on that day. It is important to note that that is a black day in our history, and what's even more important is that time and again, both the military leadership and the political leadership has reiterated that there is going to be consequence for those who have been involved in this heinous crime. And it's important also to know that we've been talking about how the masterminds and the people who are part of instigating the violence are also brought to the book. And this is important also in terms of what has happened today in the Formation Commanders meeting, in which the Chief of Army Staff was also chairing, that this was reiterated that the consequence around what has happened also would involve the masterminds, and the noose would be tightened for those who had planned this and who had been behind this entire incident. And this is important, especially in terms of what we've been seeing recently in the past as well, the kind of evidence that has been pointed towards in terms of political involvement, particularly by the leaders of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf and of course the current PTI chairman as well. So we're going to be focusing on exactly what this means in terms of what has been reiterated in the Formation Commanders meeting as to tightening the noose. We already know that the incidents of May 9th are going to be tried in anti-terrorism and military courts, and of course those responsible will be meeting their consequence. There is also an important discussion around what is being talked about as a propaganda against the military leadership, particularly involving the arrests of PTI leaders and others, and the allegations of torture or arm twisting that has been put towards the military leadership quite often. And this was something that was reiterated in the meeting today as well, saying that that is baseless, and this is just a garb behind which the political leadership that has been involved in planning the incidents of May 9th is hiding. And this is important, especially as to how that would factor in and the consequences that is also being vowed today. So that is going to be our focus in the first segment, and we'll take a look at what this means, especially in terms of the consequences that we're going to see and how the legal proceedings will eventually flow. There is also, of course, a discussion around the way that the evidence is going to be put forward and how much of that is actually going to hold weightage in front of the court, and what is going to be then the kind of responsibility that is going to be put on the people, especially the way that the instigators of violence and those who actually committed the violence are going to be differentiated. So we'll talk more about that in the first segment today. Our next segment is going to focus on a very important issue, and that is with reference to the economic situation of the country. We are, of course, in the first week of June, and by the end of this month, the IMF deal is going to expire as well. There is hope that is coming in from the top leadership of the country. The Prime Minister of Pakistan was reiterated that he is hopeful that there is going to be good news for the country, and that we're going to be hearing this news coming in from the IMF and the deal as well with regards to where the country stands today. But again, much of that still remains to be seen. We do not know exactly how that is going to happen. It seems that the executive board meeting is actually planned for the middle of June, but what is going to happen in terms of the 9th review and the staff level agreement, and then of course the actual impact for Pakistan is something that is still a question mark. At the same time, we also know that the very important and perhaps very difficult budget is just around the corner as well. With this expected to be announced on Friday on the 9th of June. And of course, we keep on talking about how this needs to be a more responsible budget, and the government will have to make some tough decisions and tough measures that they'll need to take. But exactly what they will be and how they will be able to satisfy the IMF in the same chapter is going to be important as well. We know that the Prime Minister has spoken about how he wants to give incentives to the IT sector and make it important for them to be able to move forward. But besides that, what else is going to be part of the budget is still something that we're going to be seeing. The GDP growth rate is expected to be put at 3.5% according to the Minister for Planning, Mr. Iqbal, and whether or not that is something that we'll see and how exactly will that go ahead with all of the rest of the indicators, including the inflation rate, which is at an all-time high in Pakistan, is also very important. So we'll talk more about that at in the second segment of the show and at the end of the show today. For this and more, as always in the studios, we've been joined by a senior analyst analyst Farrukh Pitafi. And for our first segment, we've been joined by Brigadier Retired Mr. Raashid Janjua, who's the Director Research at IPRI. Thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the debate. And let me start with you, Janjua Saab. The, of course, decision coming in from the Formation Commanders meeting today, and the kind of statements that we have seen echo those of the past as well. And the top brass of the military has spoken time and again about the very serious consequences that are going to be put in place for those involved in the incidents of May 9th. And we can understand the reasons behind that as well. But in terms of what is being planned and what can be expected, what do you think is there in terms of the way that the statement is given in terms of tightening the noose of law around the planners and masterminds of the people? Because so far we've seen that strict consequences and action is something that has been reiterated, but is there something much more than that that can possibly happen and is being pointed towards by the military leadership? Because if that is so, what exactly can that possibly be?
Thanks, Anna. The statement that was issued today by ISPR after this Formation Commander Conference, this is a customary statement, but the importance lay in its clear articulation of the desire and a vision which would leave all fence sitters with no doubt whatsoever. And those segments which were still trying to sow the seeds of divisiveness, and they were ambivalent also because of the continual stream of poisonous propaganda, I think that had to be laid to rest. And this is a very clear articulation of the intent to hold everyone who was culpable to account for 9th May violence. Not only the activists which were involved into the physical vandalism, but those who were behind them, who were egging them on, and whose masterminding, whose poisonous narrative that acted as a catalyst towards this violent action.
Right, absolutely. And Farrukh, this is important, especially in terms of what we've been talking about in the past, as well as to where the responsibility is going to be put forward. There are those, of course, who have actually committed the violence and have desecrated the monuments of the martyrs of the country. But then there are those also who have planned it and are part of the way that this has happened and are responsible in terms of actually making sure that this does happen. And what the statement also points towards is that even those people are not going to be let free, and they're not going to go ahead without any consequence. But what we've seen so far is that we know that the military courts are going to be there, the anti-terrorism courts are going to be there. But what else can there possibly exist in terms of the political leadership that may have been involved in this scenario?
Right, Sana. First of all, let me remind everybody, everywhere where we have seen the text being quoted, the word is not masterminds as in plural, it is mastermind. So whosoever they have in mind is one, singular. Right, but I wanted to actually bring your attention to the text of the statement as well. There are three very important components, Sana, that merited discussion here. The first one, will you allow me to read it for you?
Yes, go ahead.
The forum, while condemning the 9th May Black Day incidents in the strictest sense, reiterated their firm resolve that desecrators of Shoda Monument, Jinnah House, and attackers of military installation would certainly be brought to justice speedily under the Pakistan Army Act and Official Secrets Act, which are the derivatives of the Constitution of Pakistan. Remember, it had to be reminded that this is not extra constitutional. The second one is, says, forum concluded that unfounded and baseless allegations on law enforcement agencies and security forces for custodial torture, human rights abuses, and stifling of political activities are meant to mislead the people and malign armed forces in order to achieve a trivial vested political interest, which is, that means it is not true. The third one, remember yesterday I told you that there is an interference campaign going on to try to slow down the legal process. So the forum also answers that. Forum also resolved that endeavors by any quarter to create obstructions and stymie the conclusive defeat of all ill design of inimical forces will be dealt with iron hands.
Yeah.
So just remember that there is a lot in this, simple text that Brigadier Saab was saying that it is customary statement, although it is, but they are very crucial parts. It reminds everybody, if you are trying to aid and abet the enemy even now, please stop, otherwise things are going to be difficult. You will be dealt with iron hands. Now, regarding the political leaders and all those people who might have been involved in this, I think the situation is very simple, that there are forums that have been named, there are laws which have been named, and they will be put through the system, and we'll see who stands and who falls down.
Absolutely. Janjua Sab, the situation with regards to the military courts and anti-terrorism courts have been part of much debate, and there have been a lot of people who have perhaps also criticized the fact that this is not something that should be the way forward. And of course, the Prime Minister has also clarified that those who have targeted civilian buildings will be tried in civilian courts, those who have targeted military installations will be tried in military courts, and that this sort of aspect exists within the Constitution as well. But I want your perspective on that as well, as to whether or not this is the right way forward or the right approach as to what is being talked about and what is being said in terms of consequence, that this in fact does belong in the military and anti-terrorism courts.
I think that is the right approach for two reasons. One is the need for quick deterrence. The justice should seem not only to have been done, but in a very, very transparent manner and quickly. We know our system, which is here, even the anti-terrorist courts, they have their own loopholes. And the normal prosecution and the justice system, it comes in for a lot of criticism because of its inability to prosecute and to hold the culpable to justice. So one is that aspect. Second aspect is that it is within the Constitution that the military courts can be invoked, the jurisdiction can be invoked if any non-combatant civilian or a combatant willfully and purposely attacks a military installation on a person. So that's part of the Constitution, and there are legal remedies available. The recourse to legal remedy is available in the higher judiciary. So it's all as per the Constitution, as per the legal norms. And most important thing is that the most organized institution which has a lot of coercive apparatus at its disposal, if it didn't react in the first place to take into consideration the elements of proportionality and restraint, I think now is the time that if this Rubicon was crossed once, it should be ensured that each one which indulged in physical vandalism and whose continual propaganda injection of poison resulted into that act, into those acts of vandalism, also needs to be held to account. And nowadays we see that there's a whole ecosystem of instigation, and the social media is being used as a tool. We know 2011 UK riots, within 2 days, those were in 2011 from 9th to 11, and within 2 days 3,000 people were rounded up, 1,984 out of them were charged, and even the juveniles were not spared. So when there is anarchy is let loose because of the poison injected by a populist cult, I think the state's coercive apparatus has to swing into action, and the legal system, if it permits the military courts, the right proportionality and the right transparency, which is all inbuilt in the system of military prosecution, will take care of all those allegations of abuse of human rights, and which are always wrongly interpreted and maliciously propagated.
Right, but Janjua sir, can you also help us understand what exactly is the scale of consequence that can possibly exist, especially in terms of the political leadership that may be involved or those who are part of planning these incidents, and then what sort of consequence exists for those who actually committed the crime, and the distinction between the two? Can you help us understand the scale or intensity of the consequence that can possibly exist for such heinous crimes? Because we keep on emphasizing on how this is such a black day for the country, and this is a serious offense that has been committed, but in terms of the consequences, how serious can they be?
You see, it is all those acts which invite the invocation of jurisdiction of military courts, they are quite serious. Attacking a military target with the intent to vandalize or to cause injury, it invites prison sentence, and even those who were involved into its active instigation. So that comes within the realm of conspiring, and if it is established through a process of prosecution that this act was an act of conspiracy, then there are serious consequences, and the prison sentences, they range from years to the years and the duration of the incarceration. This is all defined as per the proportionality clauses given under the relevant acts, and the military courts use those Pakistan military law, which is as per the manual of Pakistan military law, and those acts would be judged against the relevant clause of the law that is enshrined in the military law, and prison sentence, and even if it is very serious, if it is a bodily injury, it leads to murder, so even a death sentence can be given, which had been given to the terrorists in case of APS Peshawar. But then, as I say, there are legal remedies available, and it could be scrutinied at a level where the higher judiciary comes into play. And in the past also, there has been a grouse that a lot of black terrorists, no gray or white, they were also let off because of procedural lacuna, some loophole which is exploited by the defense, and that demotivates the law enforcement agencies. And I'm sure in this case, the foolproof evidence using the technological means, geo fencing, digital space monitoring, digital forensics, and even the custodial investigation. So that will yield some very important evidence, and that evidence would be utilized for punishing and meting out this retributive treatment.
All right. Thank you very much, Brigadier Retired Raashid Wali Janjua, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Farrukh, there's also another important aspect that was discussed in the Formation Commanders meeting, and that was with regards to the propaganda, referring to the kind of torture that is being meted out to those people who particularly were part of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, and the kind of arm twisting that we've heard coming in as allegations from different quarters. But in terms of what is happening and in terms of what the public perceives, do you think that this is something that the military leadership also needs to perhaps take a look at how they're going to actually reflect upon this? Because I understand the statements, where the statements coming from, but in terms of what the people are viewing and how they're perceiving, do you think that this is perhaps just something coming in from a political party, or something that actually has an impact on the way people are looking at the military leadership as well?
I think, Sana, and I'm going to answer this question, but before that I have to actually, there are two compliments. One of them is for you. Let me actually extend that to you. Your earlier question to Brigadier Janjua was amazing. I mean, that was the question. I thought that everybody keeps on thinking about these things, and Sana manages to ask them.
Oh,
so that is a great question. And I think that, remember that when it comes to aiders, abettors, and perpetrators, there is, you can talk about distinctions, but it is the distinction without a difference. If there was a conspiracy to foment any kind of overthrow of the system, that would actually amount to instigating mutiny. And if it is proven in a court of law, then you, heavens have mercy on you. The worst possible punishments can be extended to people, right? Having said that, now let us talk about this propaganda bit. We have seen this process continuing, right? Immediately after the former Prime Minister was pushed out of power through a vote of confidence, whenever his supporters were apprehended, he would actually claim that they were denuded and they were tortured, right? Aged people had to actually come on air and just to qualify his statement and confess that yes, that has been the case. Privately, they would tell you nothing of the sort happened. Then suddenly he was arrested. There's no talk about him being denuded because he is running the propaganda campaign. After that, women and men were apprehended. Once again, the propaganda campaign started that somehow there's sexual torture or something of that sort. After that, what happens? Remember, this is an honor-based conservative society, and you are condemning the women whom you are actually accusing of being raped. And they had to actually come out and remove the stigma, telling everybody that no, nothing of the sort happened, right? What kind of horrible person does it to people who have gone to courts, who have gone to jails for you? So this is pure propaganda. I know that the PTI has hired a lot of people abroad as well to lobby to actually spread propaganda. But we haven't seen any evidence of that. Remember that whatever happens in any four walls, permeable walls are there. You get information somehow, and we haven't heard of anything. Everything was insinuation. For a day, they kept on using a woman's name and repeatedly kept on insinuating that something has happened, and she, again, and her family had to actually clarify that nothing of the sort has happened. So this propaganda campaign is just propaganda. And they have shown us, since the day he was being removed to this day, that how they keep on shifting their goalpost. They were talking about, of cipher. Then they kept on saying how America orchestrated everything. Then one army chief, then another army chief, then what becomes, a journalist turned caretaker CM of Punjab. Then God knows what else. Tomorrow they might actually blame you or me as well. But if truth is, Sana, lies, when they are spread so often, cannot stand the test of time. I think that people are apprehended, and they are not sitting in a five-star hotel. Prison is prison. But I think that there has been enough transparency to ensure that nothing untoward happens until they are given the sentence.
Absolutely. We're also going to be now taking a look at the situation regarding the economic situation of the country. And this is important in terms of course, what we've been looking at for quite some time now, and the concerns that have been shared across the board with economic experts and, of course, the public as well, dealing with a lot of pressure and tough decisions that unfortunately the government has had to take. We still haven't seen the IMF bailout package come through, but there seems to be hope coming in from the top leadership that this is eventually something that is going to be given to the country in the form of a good news. Whether that's going to happen or not, and what sort of options exist for Pakistan, we'll discuss now in our second segment, for which Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, who's a senior economist, has joined us online. Thank you very much, Dr. Khaqan, for being part of the show today. This is, of course, important in terms of where we stand today, and just a day after tomorrow, we're going to be hopefully seeing the budget as well, and it's going to be a very difficult and important budget for the current political leadership as to how they're going to be able to navigate and balance the pressures of the public and that coming in from the IMF as well. But it seems to be the case that perhaps whatever is part of the negotiations with the IMF have been factored in the current budget, and that whatever we're going to be hearing on Friday will not raise objections from the IMF. Do you think that that is an accurate statement to make in terms of what we're expecting from the budget, and that whatever issues remain with the IMF will no longer be there when the government announces the budget?
Sana, good to be with you and Pitafi Saab and on PTV World as always. I've always held this position for the last 12 to 14 months, and even prior to that, since we started especially losing our foreign exchange reserves, that Pakistan is lucky to be on an IMF program coming after COVID, when the other countries like Sri Lanka, Ghana and Bangladesh had to join one. And Pakistan should continue to be using IMF as an anchor. I'm glad that the government is making all-out effort to ensure that the 9th review is somehow completed, or the 10th review is tagged along with the 9th review, so that even the program doesn't get completed, we get some money so that it can sail us through the next quarter, because that's going to be a quarter, remember, maybe of an interim government, and that's going to be difficult without the IMF umbrella or the monies that we need to have come in this June or somewhere in July. So that's part number one. Partly now the budget is, kind of, you want to do something right, and that's more important to me than even getting IMF on board. If you do something right, IMF would come on board. What is the right thing to do here? The right thing to do, of course, is that you have a budget which is fiscally responsible, which offers relief in the sense of lowering inflation, which offers direct relief to the households that need to be helped, that creates some stability in the key sectors like the energy sector. It funds projects that are green in nature. It helps the small and medium enterprises, and overall creates some expenditure reform. And lastly, you do some kind of taxation proposals which are not only about raising GST from 17 to 18%, but much deeper and go on the retail, the wholesale, the capital gains on property, progressivity in taxation. If we can, have half of all that I've just spoken, the IMF will probably fall in line. And IMF's falling in line is important, because completion of the 10th review would, I think, hinge on our ability to do all the above things that I've mentioned to you. So I think that is the atmosphere we are working in.
Right, and Dr. Khaqan, I understand the things that you have mentioned, and they're important, and they sound nice, of course, in terms of the kind of relief that the public or the industry may be expecting. But is that something that the government will be able to afford and will be able to provide us? Because especially with the kind of IMF conditions that exist, or the situation that exists currently at the moment, it seems too good to be true. Can we actually expect that to be part of the budget?
So Sana, I think I've now written 3 main articles on Pakistan's budget with numbers. I think very few people would put numbers, because numbers can change. But so today I wrote in the news, and they carried it as a main story today, and I've said that Pakistan is looking at rupees 7,500 billion to 8,000 billion only in markup payment. And when the net federal receipts are put together on the 1st of July, I think they will not be more than 6,500 to 7,000 billion. So if I was to pay everything from the exchequer on the 1st of July in terms of markup, I would have a deficit budget. All other expenditures, subsidies, pensions, defense, raising of the grants will go through the debt financing, as well as the development budget going through the debt financing. Now, that's the difficulty the country is in. So a lot of relief will not be possible. I think 3 clear reliefs that I see coming in the budget. So, I mean, what's the good side? One, I think government will raise income support program. And the reason I say that is that PPP started this program, PMLN increased this program, PTI also took it ahead. So everyone in the country thinks that it's good for political capital because it reaches people's homes, 10 million people, 10 million households. So anywhere close to 3 crore people that we reach, and then also government will raise pensions as well as wages. This will have an effect on the private sector as well, so also sends a good signal. If I remember correctly, working with the PPP, they always wanted to do a big jump. But I think, everything put together, my best guess is 15 to 20% raise. So you guys should be looking at your salaries going up in PTV as well. The third thing I think they will do,
Yeah,
the third thing, the third thing I think they will do, and that should sensibly happen, is that the minimum wage of 25,000 should not be acceptable to any Pakistani today. They should raise it to anywhere between 30 to 35,000, depending on how you negotiate with the industrial class, because they have to raise this as well. I think the business community should then fall in line, the agriculture community should then fall in line and do all these things. Then, Sana, of course, there'll be something for the SMEs, something on the laptop scheme, something on the youth scheme. Those are what you call, cherries on the cake. But the cake is what I've mentioned to you. And these are good things to do. I think the fund will also fall in line. But the real tough one that I think the government will face challenging is, can they cut subsidies from the elite? Can they cut tax exemptions from the elite? Can they cut concessions from the elite? In our economic survey of FY22, tomorrow we'll see the new survey and we'll see the new figure. We have a figure of 1,438 billion rupees going in terms of tax concessions. Now, when the country is in trouble, you want to see part of that going away. Then something, as I keep saying, we hammer the Q block, the finance division, the most. It's been my home for a long time. And then we hammer the federal government the most. You never forget that there are 5 governments in power. I've always said that population, zakat, ushar, social sector, health, education, climate, these are all provincial subjects. I think it's time the federal government wakes up and says, we are not going to pay for your current expenditure, for your development expenditure. And I'll today give you a figure, and because it's budget time, so that's why I'm coming up with figures. 643 billion is this recent estimate by a study on public financial management done by the Q Block in consultation with the World Bank, is the kind of money that could be transferred to the provinces. Think about 643 billion that the federal government can create. That can reduce their fiscal deficit by nearly 0.7%. So, these are the things we hope to see. Can we get all that? I don't know. Let's see. That's my expectation.
Right, absolutely. And Farrukh, it's important, of course, in terms of the way that we're going to be having our expectations set regarding this budget and the way forward, especially with regards to whether or not the IMF deal comes through or not. But in terms of what the masses want to hear, of course, they're concerned with the ability to be able to afford things, the ability to be able to say that their life is easier, or that when the budget comes through or when we move on to the next fiscal year, that there is some change in the way that the people are bearing so much difficulties. In terms of actually dissecting all of this and diluting it down to the common consumer, is there going to be any relief or any sort of expectation of things being easier for the people after this budget?
Right, Sana, and that is a beautiful question again. The biggest problem is actually today I was listening to a lecture on personal money management. So there was this talk of brain being divided into 2 aspects: prefrontal cortex that makes your decision, and the limbic system, which is elephant in the room, nobody acknowledges it. So every time you get money, your prefrontal cortex says that you want to spend it wisely, to save it. But the elephant actually is in command, and it asks you to throw away money to buy this luxury or that luxury. So this is the situation with our economy right now as well. we have this impulse to pass on any kind of comfort that is possible to the people. But unfortunately, because we have this bureaucratic or post-colonial kind of economy, most of the things were actually focused on subsidies. And because of that, today when you have actually started removing those subsidies, because people, the government of Pakistan cannot afford it, then people feel the heat. But my humble submission now is that because we have been trying to comply with IMF's demands for past 3-4 years, especially past 1 year, the situation is so vitiated already that if we finally get through to the IMF and we get some kind of closure on the program, then perhaps the situation automatically will start improving. So the government of Pakistan can create, when Dr. Saab was speaking, I think BISP and other programs of similar nature have been great example, because they have repeatedly created data that has been used to take care of people during distressing times. I'm talking about the very poor, very vulnerable. And Dr. Saab also mentioned COVID days. So there is also a distinction from IMF's side. At that time, Geeta Gopinath was not actually designing that recovery program. It was Raghuram Rajan, right? A brilliant economist who has been, governor of India's, RBI, Reserve Bank of India, and he teaches at Chicago University. He was a man, and there is a very sharp difference between the two philosophies of these two people. Our, current program was actually designed by Geeta Gopinath, and she is actually holding our feet to fire, or her team is. So we'll have to see how this actually we manage to get through, but if we do, things are going to get better. And now 2 corrections also. Dr. Saab said that there are 5 governments. There are actually 7 governments. Remember, Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan also depend on the center for support. And having said that, regarding the contractual employees and their salaries actually increasing, let me actually burst that bubble. Their salaries in government sector don't automatically, get increased through budgets. And I'm sure that there are so many contractual employees across the board in many other departments. So for that, there will one day have to be some kind of new push, but that is perhaps not going to
Hopefully, happen. Absolutely. Hope there will be better days for us, Farrukh.
I'm not agreeing with that hope.
Right. Dr. Khaqan, the issue with reference to where we stand today and the kind of decisions the government has to take, you are also mentioning on the expenditure cuts perhaps, and the way that we need to also look at all of that. The situation with reference to the budget is also important in terms of what sort of expenditure we're going to be seeing in different sectors. For example, the defense budget is something that does come under certain criticism as to why is it not perhaps lessened or reduced in terms of other important budgets, and especially now when we have to make such difficult choices. How do you think that is going to actually pan out, and whether or not, when we take a look at the situation currently, will we be able to actually choose which areas we can actually make that sort of a cut, because there is also an important measure that needs to be taken with regards to the growth of the economy. So where exactly do you think that the government can actually very quickly or perhaps very easily make those certain cuts, and what should be the way forward in that?
So good points. On the expenditure side, the reason I speak is that creates more credibility that the government itself is very serious. So I think the first place to begin is to see subsidies. So get rid of all the subsidies that you give to fertilizer sector. Instead of that, go directly to the people through the income support program, flagship program Pakistan has. I've always said, when I speak about it abroad, I speak with confidence. So, that's one thing to do. In even electricity, a lot of people get electricity subsidy in their bills, but they don't realize that the government, is, I think, about 6 million customers, if I'm not mistaken, get that kind of subsidy, but they don't realize. They think that's the price for them. That's actually not the price for them. It's highly subsidized by the what we call the tariff differential subsidy, TDS, the actual tariff and then the differential and the subsidy that the government gives. So go direct to these people, however many people you want to go to. That's one. On the defense, I think there is a real talk. Let me say this. Defense is what, hovering around 1500 to 1600 billion this year, probably likely to go up by 1800. So the rise in defense should be as minimal as possible, as the defense has been doing. Just compare that defense rise to 7,500 billion in markup payments. So that is the real work where you need to do debt reprofiling, opening up of what I've called treasury single account. These are public financial management tools, so that this 7,500 billion rupees of markup has to be handled in the coming years. Also, if inflation comes down, the rate comes down, the policy rate. So, you have to start thinking about these things. Then your development expenditure. As I just mentioned, the things that you don't have in the 18th Amendment has devolved them, get rid of them, so that you save 100 or 200 billion rupees there. Running of the civil government, eventually you would have to do this, that pensions and running of the civil government would have to be streamlined, because you cannot have the kind of divisions, the kind of subordinated institutions that work under it. And this pension of 609 billion this year and rising next year is an untenable position. So you need to at least slow the growth in this. So a comprehensive expenditure reform, part of it hopefully will be in this budget, but in the coming years we want to do this surgery.
All right, great. Farrukh, with reference to providing incentives to the industry, also we've seen that the Prime Minister has specifically also spoken about the IT industry and to promote that, and also the entrepreneurship ecosystem in the country. And these are good steps forward and important things to invest in. But again, in terms of where we stand today, my concern is whether or not this is something that we can actually achieve and can actually provide to the industry, because of if there is so much restraint in terms of what we can actually spend on, or the limited budget that we will be having, how exactly will we be able to provide the kind of incentives that any particular sector industry would need, whether it's IT or anything else, while at the same time, if the inflation is too high, or if basic resources or utilities are too high, how will the two we be able to actually balance and make sure that the industry does thrive?
Right, Sana, and let me take you back, because again, a brilliant question. Let me take you back to the day when floods were inundating Pakistan. At that time, we heard that many industries have been shuttered because they don't have supplies, or because the roads or infrastructure has been swept away, right? At that time, when we were discussing it, we said one of the quickest investment possible is IT, because A, you need people and computers. You don't need mega projects or industries to actually take care of this business. Then human resource, if it is sound, you can encourage and you can improve the access as well to international market. And third thing is regarding the concessions that you were talking about, there's always room for some kind of tax holidays or concessions. Whenever you are going to actually invest in an industry, this is how you go about doing it. But then, of course, you are cutting taxes. So where does, how do you compensate for it? The easiest thing is tax property. Start taxing property developers, because they are minting money. And if you actually start doing it and you don't allow them to interfere in your policy through lobbying, your state will start getting very rich. So IT is easy. Other industries can also be encouraged if you want to, but the only we used to have better circumstances regarding LSM, but then of course we started actually curtailing imports, and because of that LSM also production started going down. So eventually what I'm hoping is once we are back on board with IMF, we can actually start easing this situation where we have to actually worry about our current account all the time, and because of that we have to control the imports. If that happens, these industries will start improving as well. But the problem, Sana, once again, Prime Minister was right. I remember earlier I said that I'm going to praise another person in the program as well, and somebody who has been growing very fast in my eyes, and that is former President Asif Ali Zardari. Today he was in Lahore, where he was attending a conference by PCI, but where he was talking about the importance of Charter of Economy. But he has actually upgraded People's Party's concept. People's Party earlier used to say that everywhere in public sector, dumb people, keep on increasing that number. Now he says that government should not run the businesses that the private sector can. And I'm a libertarian, I'm like Ron Swanson, I'm sitting in public sector, but I talk about importance of the private sector. But I think that Asif Ali Zardari is playing a very clever game, and because of that he's leading the race. He's ahead of his competitors by miles right now.
All right. Thank you very much, Farrukh, and thank you very much, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. There is, of course, a lot that still remains to be seen, and we're hoping for good news on Friday. But, of course, we have to keep in mind that these are tough times and that they call for tough decisions, and the government is trying its best to keep the country afloat and to make sure that whatever it is that we're going to be seeing in the next fiscal year is something that is both good for the country and is able to balance the current scenario that Pakistan is in and slowly take it out of this mess. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.